When I say I have this thought that I'm bad or that I'm a pathetic loser, people are like, oh, no, you're not. Don't think that. That's not okay. You shouldn't do, I don't like that. But the fact of the matter is that I do, right? So here's the normalization part. Of course I think that. It makes complete sense that I think that way. I was socialized to think that way, right? That's like I internalized it. It became part of my identity, right? How human of you that you think that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Take 2 Minutes podcast. I'm your host and founder of Take2Minutes.org, Mark Fussell. Joining me today is Karen C.L. Anderson. Karen is a life coach who helps adults navigate and heal from relationships with their mothers. She's also the author of several books, including You Are Not Your Mother, Releasing Generational Trauma and Shame, and another book, Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration. Both books I found easily on Amazon. Karen is also the host of the Dear Adult Daughter podcast, available on multiple platforms, including Apple and Spotify, with over 140 episodes. Each episode has a topic and a short discussion. Karen, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
I'm glad to be here, Mark. Thanks.
I appreciate your time. Tell us more than what I just gave as an intro about yourself, what you do, and who you help.
So it's funny because a lot of people say, well, how did you get into this? And I say, well, I have a mother. And yes, it's been an issue for me for most of my life. It is a subject that has just always sort of been front and center. And, over the years, it, was something I really struggled with. And I think most people can sort of relate to the idea that, that with which we struggle sometimes informs our work. And we want to help others who have experienced similar. And what's interesting to me as a somewhat older person, is seeing now in the past 5 or so years, how many more people are talking about difficult mother-daughter or, mother-adult-daughter relationships. So there's the cat. That's kind of how I got into this. And what was interesting is that at one time, I'm a writer first and foremost, and I've done a lot of writing in a lot of different subjects and freelance. And at one time I wrote for the plastics industry. And, but it was when I decided to become a life coach, which I wasn't thinking about mother-daughter relationships when I decided to become a life coach, but it was during some of the trainings and the certification process that a lot of my mother stuff was coming up and getting in the way. And some of the healing work that I did and some of the mindset work, and then also learning about the nervous system and trauma and all of that kind of stuff, really then pushed me in that direction because I saw the impact that it was having on me and my relationship with my mother, but even more importantly, my relationship with myself. So that's how I got here.
And so you do take clients for your life coach practice, and
yes.
Those clients, I would, by your content, I would assume were generally female. Is that correct?
Generally, yeah. I have not specifically worked with men, but one-on-one, but I have men who are on my mailing list, and they sometimes ask me questions. But generally, the women that I work with or the people that I work with are more midlife. I find that, especially for women, after their childbearing years and whether they've had children or not, they find themselves in a place of like, oh, what's next? What's going on? And it's a time of reckoning. It's a time of sort of looking back and, seeing maybe like what needs to change. If their mothers are still alive and it is a difficult relationship, how to have healthy boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. Or navigating when their mothers are elderly and it hasn't been a great relationship. Like, what do you do then?
Even healthy boundaries, I think, apply if your mother is not older. And I think you've touched on the topic of narcissistic mothers a few times.
Yes.
And
yes.
If you have a narcissistic parent, having boundaries in that situation is also very important. Would you agree?
100%. And yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting to me, as I said, is that nobody was really talking about this 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it really seems to be exploding. I mean, if you go on TikTok, the kids these days, I mean, they're great. I love them. And they're really, you know, it's just become such an interesting, and in some cases, like intergenerational, there's a lot of understanding that can happen. But then again, there's also, you know, people who are set in their ways and are like, you know, kids are just being disrespectful and don't get it and that kind of thing.
So can you expand more on those who have a narcissistic parent and what some of your conversations are around those individuals?
Mostly it's understanding. I think that sort of two pieces. I'm a big proponent of, yes, it's important to understand why our parents, our mothers, whichever parent it is, are the way they are. And yes, it can be helpful to have compassion and empathy with, you know, for understanding that. I don't know if this is like scientifically proven or not, but my understanding is that somebody who has narcissism or a similar personality issue, that it is most likely based in trauma as well. I mean, it's not like they just decided, you know what, I want to be a jerk, right? I don't think people, you know, decide that they just want to be not nice people or not great parents. You know, I think everybody wants to be a good parent. So understanding that can be helpful, but it's also then not an excuse for like, okay, well, now I'm just going to let that parent, you know, ruin my life, or I'm not going to have I'm not that I'm going to not have boundaries with that parent, or, and what often happens is when you are the child of a narcissist, you blame yourself. You think that they are that way because there's something wrong with you. And that's why my most recent sort of foray has been into shame and understanding shame, both from the perspective of that narcissists probably have a lot of shame that is completely unacknowledged and unexamined, and then that shame is then passed along to their children. Just like it just is sort of like not magic. We don't want to call it magic, but like it just happens, you know.
Let's expand upon that. What is shame and how is it misunderstood? Because I think I saw something on one of your podcasts about shame and being misunderstood. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. In researching my book that I wrote last year, I was researching evolution and like, why do we have shame? Because we are physiologically hardwired, meaning our physiology has the ability to experience sensations in our body and postures that indicate shame, like crumpled up, hide, you know, curled up, like that. This is like a shame response, right? Physiologically, it is something that's hardwired into us. And just like we have an appendix, you know, as biologically we were born, humans have an appendix. What biological evolutionists, or I should say evolutionary biologists, have discovered is that the reason we needed an appendix was to digest the food that we ate when we were living in caves, right? We didn't have microwaves and air fryers and all that kind of stuff, right? So the appendix was there to process that kind of food. We don't eat that kind of food anymore. We don't really need our appendix. We're still born with one. And it's kind of the same for shame. Evolutionarily, we needed shame to stay safe and procreate and propagate the species. And shame was a very useful tool, I guess. I don't know what to call it a tool, but like a response to keep us safe in our tribes and not do anything that would cause harm to the tribe. So my take is that it's similar to an appendix. We still have it, we're still wired for it, but we don't really need it. And just like an appendix can make a lot of trouble for us and maybe kill us if we don't take it out, right? Same for shame. We don't need it the same way we used to. So shame, basically, at its core, we can, look to Brene Brown for a lot of research on shame, but I like what she says, right? Shame is basically that there is something irredeemably, irrevocably wrong with me. I'm bad. And there's no coming back from that. Whereas guilt, which, a lot of people say, well, what about healthy shame? Isn't there like a good, well, that isn't shame, that's guilt, right? And guilt is when we've acted out of alignment with our values or our moral code. And that's different. We can course correct from that.
So in that, do you have more? I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
No.
Okay. Is that part of your framework and solution regarding shame, or is that a different topic?
No, it comes out of that, but it's, again, the point being here when it comes to our mothers and our fathers, is to understand the difference between shame and guilt, and to understand that shaming has been used. It's an easy way out to control people. It is it's like the easy way to get someone to comply.
Yeah, whereas that last sentence, I resonated with that as far as shame to control people, especially from a narcissistic parent. You have that element of shame to control you.
Yes. Yeah. So the framework is something that, it's funny because I didn't create it until after my book came out, which I'm like, anyway, whatever. I guess that's just the nature of, human brains don't always think of everything before the books come out. But in dealing with my own shame, which has been sort of a lifelong companion, and it's not, some of this framework isn't like brand new, like you've never heard of it before, but there is one piece that I think is. So the framework consists of 6 N's, N words. The first one is notice. Okay, so again, that's one that I think we're all aware of, right? Like, pay attention, what's going on, what am I noticing, what's happening here, right? Who's in this dynamic, what am I feeling, what am I thinking, right? It's like just being aware and noticing.
And that's your thoughts. If I listened to one of your podcasts about that, notice is noticing your thoughts, correct?
Correct. And noticing what's happening and who's around and, all the details. And then the next N is to name it, right? Again, like, to me, thoughts, feelings, actions, right? That's like the cornerstone of mindset work, that's how we can identify a pattern. So, I have this thought which makes me feel this way, which has me acting this way. And I can say, okay, well, that's my like procrastination pattern, right? Or, whatever you want. My shame this is one of my shame patterns. It's kind of hard sometimes for people when I say this, but, I've been able to identify 3 core shame beliefs that I've had, from childhood. The first one is simply, I'm bad. The second one is, I'm a selfish, spoiled brat. And the third one is, I'm a pathetic loser. And those thoughts still live within me, right? And this framework, right, it's like I had to become aware and notice those thoughts and be able to identify them and name them, right? So that's the second N, is name. The third N is what I think a lot of people miss or haven't thought about. And that is to normalize. Because when I say I have this thought that I'm bad or that I'm a pathetic loser, people are like, oh, no, you're not. Don't think that. That's not okay. You shouldn't do, I don't like that. I hate that you think that about yourself. But the fact of the matter is that I do. Right? So here's the normalization part. Of course I think that. It makes complete sense that I think that way. I was socialized to think that way, right? That's like I internalized it. It became part of my identity. So it makes sense that I think that. And for me, it's funny, even just saying it out loud now, I feel in my body this like kind of amazing sense of like validation, right? That like, I'm not just some weirdo who happens to think these thoughts. It makes sense that I think these thoughts. It's like, of course I think these thoughts. It makes all the sense in the world that this is what I would think, given how I was raised and what messages I received in childhood. And I think many of us receive similar messages.
Yeah, so they were instilled in you. They were instilled in you, right? From
yeah.
Mother.
So normalizing it and not thinking actually that there is something additionally wrong with me, that I think that way, is, as I said, it's so validating, and it actually, to me, it feels like it sends cues to my nervous system to be like, oh, okay, whew, yeah, this is all okay. You're a human, right? How human of you that you think that. So then the next N is to neutralize, right? Oh, okay. When I'm thinking that way, which of course I am, right? I experience all kinds of sensations in my body. Right? The sensations that I talked about before that are hardwired in, the shame sensations, right? For me, it is like burning face, wanting to hide, curling up, just feeling like it's hard to swallow. So because part of the problem is when we notice those sensations, or when we're having those sensations, what we do is we make the sensations mean something, right? Sometimes if we were to shift away from shame for a second and maybe go to anxiety, which maybe you can relate to those sensations more easily, right? For me, anxiety is weak knees, pounding heart, shallow breathing. And what we have a tendency to do is notice the sensations and make the sensations mean actually there's something really wrong now, right? And that if I feel the sensations of shame, that must mean I deserve to, or that I should feel that way. And so the meaning making, right, just like becomes its own little problem. And so neutralizing and just being able to say, yes, my heart is racing, or I want to crawl into my bed and die, right? Or I don't want to ever see anybody ever again, right? Like normalizing or neutralizing the sensation, right? Like, oh, that's just weak knees. Oh, that's just my heart pounding, right? Doesn't mean anything other than that my body is responding the way it always responds in these kinds of situations.
Okay.
And so then there's two more N's.
Yep.
The next one is need. And what do I need? Okay, I'm noticing all the things that I've already noticed. What do I need? Maybe I do need to just like go to my room, or go be by myself for a little while and tend to what's happening. Maybe I want to go for a walk. Maybe I need a hug, right? And then finally, the last N is next. What am I going to do next? Am I going to go find someone who can hug me? Right? Okay. Am I going to go for that walk? Maybe not, and in the case of, this is usually where a lot of people come to, okay, what's next is I do need to set boundaries.
So it sounds like the 6 N's was notice, name, normalize, neutralize, need, and next. Yeah. And it sounds to me like the first couple are more around recognition of the situation, and the latter ones are around how to self-help or heal yourself or react or respond to the situation or feelings. Is that?
And I think you're probably aware, I'm aware that there are lots of frameworks out there like this. It's not, rocket science. This is what people have been doing for a long time, using different language and whatever. For me, the N that's most important is the normalize. That is where we, what I call unshame. We unshame the thoughts, the feelings, the actions. We don't make ourselves wrong for the fact that we actually think that way. It's a real act of self-compassion to I put my hand on my heart and say, oh my God, yes, of course I'm anxious right now. I don't like flying. And it's
Right.
okay that I don't like flying. I don't have to get over it. I don't have to make myself like it. I can just not like it. I can hate it if I want to. It makes sense.
Like that, because there's a lot of situations I think a lot of people deal with that are just like that. And I also like the need and next ends, because I'm a big proponent of self-help, or finding ways to self-help. And I think those two are important for people to recognize ways they can self-help. And it's just putting different words on it. But ultimately, you mentioned maybe you need a hug, maybe you need to go for a walk. I think there's a lot of means of self-help people can do to help themselves in these situations. I talk a lot about meditation. I talk a lot about yoga, exercise. Those things also are ways to self-help if those are pertinent to the individual. But I think the point I'm making here is the need and next is probably different for each individual as to what their needs are and what they want to do next.
Yeah, and having some self-agency there. And I would say this is probably more the case for women than for men. But it's funny, I was having a conversation with a colleague fairly recently, and she's close to my age. And she goes, I didn't realize until relatively recently that my values matter, that I get to decide what I value, not what my husband or the religion or the parents or whoever. Right. And so that speaks to that piece of asking what we need and what's next, and understanding that it's important to question what we think we need based on what other people have said. Do I really need that, or is that what I was taught that I need?
I so agree with that. Take 2 Minutes has all kinds of messages, just positive messages for people in addition to all the other activities. And there's a message, I wrote it, but I can't say it exactly because I don't remember. There's 1,600 messages, but it was something along the lines of, don't let others' expectations of you weigh on you, because that's something that we all, I think a lot of us deal with, is expectations others have on us. We want to meet those expectations, but really you can't allow that to weigh you down. You have to be happy with yourself and your level of effort, and not let others' expectations alter who you are or how you behave or how you feel about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you started this, right, around children.
Yes.
And one of the things that I love about the normalize step is, I think many of us as children were told, just get over it. Don't worry about it. You don't really feel the way you say you feel, right? It's not okay for you to feel that way. And the normalized step is to say it is okay, that it makes sense that you feel that way. Because we're so quick, I think most of it is, and I have experienced this myself, we don't want to be with people it's hard for us to be with people who are uncomfortable. We want to fix it. We want to make them better. We don't want them to have whatever negative feelings they have. And, it seems like so simple, but it is something I think humanity is working out right now, is how can we be okay with the things that aren't okay?
Going back to your analogy of the appendix and shame and our ancestors and how they had to deal with shame, I think a lot of emotions are similar to that. If you talk about fear or anxiety, I think a lot of those emotions are, again, because we had to be fearful of a saber-toothed tiger attacking us. And there's just all these emotions that we had and are still instilled in us from decades or centuries ago that we still
millennia
now. Millennia, yeah, exactly. Without a doubt. There's a lot. And then, of course, you have media playing on that, trying to instill fear in all areas of what's going to happen with the world and how bad things are, and they're using those as a means to get our attention, and that can drive someone into a downward spiral if they're not careful.
Yeah, and I joke, with people that I'm working with, or friends, or anybody who will talk to me, that, again, like it makes sense that you feel like there's a saber-toothed tiger, and logically, there isn't one, but it still makes sense that it feels that way. So, because what happens, I don't know about you, but I used to shame myself mercilessly because I thought I knew better. Well, I'm not supposed to have this fear because I'm evolved and I'm a life coach and I know how to manage my mind. And yet there would be the fear. And so unshaming the fact that I have fear helps. It doesn't take it away completely 100%, but it does. It passes so much more quickly when I can say, oh, yes, I'm afraid my neighbor walked past me without saying hello. And that means that I'm going to be cast out of the tribe, and I'm going to go live in the desert, and I'm going to die alone because my neighbor didn't say hello.
Right.
That's what our brains do. How human of me.
My father said something to me once, and this is an interesting segue because my father and I didn't have a whole lot of relationship, but one time he did say to me on the exact topic, I don't think there's any requirement for you to like your neighbors are like you. I was like, that makes sense. Because I think I was going through almost that exact same thing. I had a neighbor who I was like, I'm not getting along with this person. And I was probably stressed about it. And my father of all things said, that's what he told me after that. I was like, and it kind of set in like, I get that. That makes sense. One other thing, Karen and I, before we started recording, was talking about, and I just want to touch on this, that I really, after listening to some of her Instagram posts and listening to some of her podcasts, her content is definitely targeted at daughters, but I think I really absorbed and recognized a lot of the content. So even though if you're listening to this, her content is focused on daughters, it related to me. So I think there's content there that's good for anyone if you can relate to it. If you've been in a situation such as that, there's some good content out there to check out. Going to your life coach practice, can you expand upon that? Like, who is your ideal client, and what kind of work do you do? What kind of life coaching do you do for them?
Generally, it is women, as I said, more middle-aged, not necessarily, but generally. The oldest client I ever worked with was 80, and the youngest, I think, was in her 20s, but I don't remember exactly how old she was. Most of them have identified the fact that their mothers have been an issue in their lives. Some of them, it is all about setting boundaries. How can I set boundaries with my mother? Or in some cases, they're estranged and they want to reestablish contact, and they want to do that safely. As I said, it's also sometimes wanting to navigate now an elderly mother who needs more help, and how do I do that while maintaining boundaries? Or in some cases, right, I don't know if I should swear. There's no way in heck that I want to get involved with my mother when she's old. How do I assuage that guilt that I feel, or shame even that I feel? Some of my clients have noticed, and this is the one I can relate to the most, is I have something to say or do in this world and put myself out there, and I'm terrified because of what my mother's going to think. How do I get over that? How do I put myself out there in a way that, my mother has shamed me for most of my life? So it's a lot of different things, but the three main things that we work on is creating safety. Right? Because, right, if we don't feel safe in our bodies, and I think most of us can relate to not feeling safe in our bodies at times. But if there's trauma, and I am not a therapist, and I don't work with people who are actively processing trauma, but I do teach ways to connect with the self, connect to what's happening in your body so that you're aware of what's happening, so that you can send cues of safety to yourself, to your system. I mean, I'll just say it, all I have to do, and it's been a long time now, but, my mother at this point has decided she doesn't want to talk to me. That's fine. But like I would see an email from her, and immediately it would be like a literal, tensing up in my body. And so, right, how do I create safety for this or for myself? The second piece is creating what I call an intentional identity. And this isn't about changing who you are or becoming someone different. It's basically looking through your life for moments when you were really proud of yourself, you really loved what you were doing, you were maybe standing up for someone else, you were maybe in awe of something in the best possible way that like almost brought you to tears. We're talking about those moments in our lives that were really, really meaningful for one reason or another. And when we look at those moments, we can generally, and the questions that I ask are, what did you observe in yourself? What would somebody who is watching you, what would they say they witnessed in you? And I love this process because I love hearing them tell me the stories, and I get them really engaged in who else was there? Where were you? Was it hot? Were you inside? What did the room look like? Was it cold? As many sensory details as you can. And they start telling me these stories, and I write down things because they generally will say things that they're not aware that they're saying about themselves. And those become, sort of like supercharged affirmations because they are their own affirmation. They're not somebody just saying, oh, look in the mirror and say, I'm beautiful, right? It's something that they already believe about themselves, but that they forgot until I reminded them. And so the creation of intentional identity is such a beautiful process, and it's ongoing. I tell people, you're going to start this process with me, but you keep it going on your own. I've been doing it for 5 years for myself, and it changes and morphs, and, different stories come up. I remember certain things differently. And I just add those little snippets of language, but they always have attached to them so much more than just words. It's a whole physical, multi-sensory memory. And when I think that phrase or I remember that moment, I'm immersed back in it completely. And from there, I show up the way I want to show up. Right? I mean, and there's different flavors, right? My intentional identity has 3 different flavors: dignity, expression, and audacity. And they're 3 very different experiences. And I can decide, I'm going to be talking to some guy I don't know on a podcast, right? How do I want to show up? What do I need to do in order? And it's not about pumping myself up in a fake way, right? It's remembering who I am based on the work I've done, this intentional identity work. And what do I believe about myself? That I truly do believe about it, not that somebody else fed me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally is healthy boundaries, creating the healthy boundaries, which often are more for you than they are for your mother or your father or whoever you're setting the boundary with. And the intentional identity work, which is based on values too, really informs that, because I see boundaries as being your values in action, basically, right? It's not about, you can't do that. I mean, sometimes it's about that and deciding, I don't want to be around that behavior right now. That's not okay. Right. But the more secure you are in your intentional identity, the more your energy speaks for you.
I can again relate to a lot of this as well. And I think for myself, I'm in my 50s right now, and just to
I'm
disclose
61.
What was that?
I'm 61.
You look wonderful, Karen. I would never guess that. Would never have guessed that. But ultimately, it wasn't until probably my early 40s that I really started recognizing I should be happy with who I am and having some self-confidence. Not that I didn't display self-confidence in years prior to that, but I think it really came into myself in my guess is 40ish or early 40s where I started having a feeling, and really it might have been mid 40s where I had a feeling of self-confidence and was just happy with who I was. And that was a big change in my life to, going back to shame, not feeling shame for what I was told I should do or I should be or how I should act or anything along those lines, but recognizing I am who I am now and I'm happy with who I am because I know I try hard and I know I do well. And if I don't meet someone else's expectations, that's on them more than it is on me because I know I'm trying hard. And I think a lot of people probably still struggle with that.
Yeah.
Again, I did in my 40s.
Yeah, it seems like I kind of started to wake up in my early 40s. That's when it was like, it kind of hit me like, wait a minute, something's not okay here. And it's been just ongoing ever since. Yeah. But that's what I see younger people, kids even. I listened to an interview. I won't say what the subject was because it's controversial, but they were interviewing a college student. And I was like, who is this person? She's like calm, no nervousness. At least I couldn't tell. I mean, just very sure of what she was talking about. Very she had boundaries. She's like, yep, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't want to answer that question, but I'll, and I'm like, what? I still don't think I could show up that way,
So with a narcissistic parent, a conversation I had with another guest was around if narcissists recognize they are narcissists. I'm assuming you have a narcissistic parent. Do you think they recognize or they did recognize they were a narcissist or not?
I don't know. What's interesting is that she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. And I remember when I was, probably in my 20s, I remember my mother saying, Grandma's a narcissist. I will say that I have noticed narcissistic tendencies in myself, which makes sense, I think. I think all of us, it's like a spectrum or,
yes.
And I think there is some help, but I can look back in my life and see moments when it wasn't healthy or that I was, and does that mean I'm a narcissist? I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm not an expert in this topic, so I'm going to disclaim that first, but I had a conversation with someone a few weeks ago, and I think everyone has some narcissistic tendencies for the purposes of self-preservation. It doesn't mean you're a narcissist. You are just trying to take care of yourself, and some of those things can come across as narcissistic tendencies.
My mom has at times very few, I could count it as an adult on one hand, probably just two fingers, has sort of indicated that she is I can't even remember specifically what she said, but it was something along the lines of, maybe I didn't handle that right. Or, maybe you don't understand everything that I went through, which I can't understand everything that she went through, but I do know that, the way she was raised, squashed her spirit, and it was a tragedy, I think, on so many levels. And my heart just aches for her young self. But I don't know if I don't know. It's hard. It's interesting. My mom is a very smart person. And I guess I would guess that she may have thought about it, but I don't know. She's not told me that, that's for sure.
One of your, I don't know if it's an Instagram post or a podcast I was listening to, you talked about you are not your parent. And I related to that also. and you said more than that. It was that's a very simplistic overview of the conversation. But ultimately, so Take 2 Minutes started for my older son. I started writing positive messages for him when he was in high school. And it wasn't until he was in his, I don't even know now, early 20s probably, that I had the realization I was trying to raise him how I was raised, by control. And I was trying to control him and tell him what to do, and tell him, not necessarily giving him suggestions on how he should do things, but tell him exactly this is what you need to do, and trying to control him. If he didn't do it, I get mad at him. And it was that realization that I was trying to raise him as I was raised that was allowed me to shift how I raised him. And this was, he's 28-ish now. I say 28-ish because he's got a birthday coming up. But it was, probably 4 or 5 years ago that I had that realization, and our relationships changed for the much better since then, because now he still comes to me, and more so probably with what do I do? And I give him suggestions and ideas, and I tell him what I would do, but then it's his choice to do what he wants to do based upon my suggestions. If he doesn't do what I suggested, that's okay. It's, he's an adult now. He's going to have to learn his own things. I've given him my suggestion. He doesn't have to do what I think is right for him. What's right for him is what he should be doing. And he ideally should, if he hypothetically makes a mistake for what he did, as long as he learns from that mistake, it's okay. And that change and shift of not raising him as I was raised really helped our relationship.
Well, I never wanted to be a mom, and I'm not. I am happily child-free. I did marry a man who has 3 children. We've been married almost 27 years, together 30 years. His children are now 44, 41, and 38, something like that. So they were, the youngest was, I think, 9 when I met her the first time. And then, the boys were teenagers. And oh my goodness, I can look back at, and I outline many of them in my book, You Are Not Your Mother. Moments when I look back and I cringe at, because I was acting just like my mother and my stepfather too. I mean, my parents got divorced when I was 2. My mother remarried when I was 5, and my father also remarried when I was 5. So I had all the step stuff going on too. But, my mother and stepfather, that dynamic, that family life was not great. But yeah, I did see myself playing that out. And being like with my husband, you need to get in there, and my husband is just, he is brilliant. But I have watched him be like you, right? We'll have a conversation. You come to me and tell me what's going on. And, as he puts it, most of the time they figure it out just talking to him. He doesn't even have to give them advice necessarily. Sometimes they'll ask and he'll give it, but it's very similar. He's been emotionally mature since the get-go.
Good.
Which is awesome. Yeah. But yeah, I totally can relate to that. Looking back at times where I was totally trying to control, which of course we were.
Right. Of
right.
Course.
Let's normalize it. We were. Of course we were. That's what we were taught.
So you have other books in the works right now?
No, thank goodness.
Okay.
I've written several books. I talk about these two the most, though. There is another one that is like a sort of mother-daughter journal, for mothers and daughters who aren't getting along, to sort of journal, through that. And I also wrote about overcoming creative anxiety.
Oh, nice. So I named 2 of your books. Which ones did I miss?
Well, one of them is called Overcoming Creative Anxiety. Okay. And the other one is, I think it's called, what is it? The Difficult Mother-Daughter Relationship Journal.
Okay.
They're all on Amazon. Yeah.
You have 4 books. Good for you.
Yeah. So it's funny. I don't know what I would write about next. Every time I finish a book, I'm like, that's it. I'm done.
4 is quite a bit. Good for you, definitely. And then your podcasts, if I'm not mistaken, are not so much with guests as much as it is you talking about a topic that either someone asked you about or brought to your attention. Is that correct?
Yep. And they're short because I am the kind of person who doesn't sit and listen to long podcasts. I'll probably never listen to this one. So yeah, they're just little bite-sized things. I think the shortest one is less than a minute long.
Yeah, I noticed most of them, I think, are all under 10 minutes. There's one,
I think, that's like 25, but yeah.
Was it? Okay. I didn't come across that one then and listening to them. I enjoyed them. And I think it's a difference in personality again. Neither is right or wrong. There are a lot of people who live by podcasts now. They put their earphones in and listen to podcasts all day long. And there's others listen to music all day long. Or there's some probably do neither one. And everything is okay. There's no right or wrong. But ultimately, podcasts are very popular now. Like this one here, we're at like, 35 minutes or so, 40 minutes right now. Which for me, I agree with you, it'd be a long time to listen to one topic, but I enjoy the conversation. So you and I are having a conversation. So this makes it fun for me. Listening to a podcast for that long would be tough for me. I would probably skim it, listen to parts here and there. But that's also, I guess what I'm getting at is why I liked your podcast, because I could listen to them in a short amount of time and get something out of them and relate to some of the topics. And I found that enjoyable.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I love to write. Writing is how I know myself. It is how I learned about myself, was by writing. And I do send out an email newsletter. I call them my love notes. It's not regular. I mean, it's not like every Tuesday or anything. Sometimes it's twice a week. Sometimes I go 2 weeks without doing one. Mostly, I would say my email newsletter turns into a podcast. So if you're not on the email list, you'll get it over on the podcast or vice versa.
Let's talk about the email list. How do you sign up for that?
My website, which is kclanderson.com. Subscribe, I think, /subscribe. Yeah. And
is there a cost to being on that subscription, or is it a free subscription?
It's free. Good. And you get a boundaries guide that I wrote if you sign up. It's funny, I keep thinking I need to change that. It's been there for a long time, but people are, I don't know, the whole email, that whole like marketing thing is like, that's a whole other subject.
Marketing is interesting. Luckily, knock on wood, I'm very fortunate to have a small team helping me with Take 2 Minutes right now, because it's a whole different discipline than, I'm a technologist by heart. So the technology is what's easy for me. When it comes to marketing and stuff, that takes a different skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of different ways to interact with me. And it's funny because you mentioned Instagram. I'm not very active there.
You're not?
I'm old.
You have a lot of good posts, but I haven't looked to see how frequent they are. I didn't look at that at all.
Facebook is where I'm, because I'm old. I'm technically a boomer, right? A white boomer named Karen. I'm more active on Facebook.
Let's see. So Instagram, the last one I'm looking at, I guess April 19th. So it's not, but you have some great posts. You have some really.
There's a backlog. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. There's a backlog. And when I was scanning, you have a lot of posts that look different, but then I hit a section, which is all your face with that background, the lights behind you, and you're talking. And those are the ones
those were TikToks.
Oh, is that what they were originally? They're on Instagram too. I guess that's why I was looking on Instagram. So I found that, and you had some good short posts there. I enjoyed some of those.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I it's just coming back to that intentional identity piece, right? Which sounds fancy, like okay, but really, it's like this is what I do. It's like this just feels like breathing to me,
Yeah. Is there anything else you think our listeners should know about regarding you or your work, or?
Root out shame, look for it, don't be afraid of it. At the risk of sounding like Miss America or whatever, I think that's what's going to make the world a better place. There is no place in our world for shame. I think some people think there is, like some people should be ashamed of themselves, but I would say that that's actually what's got us into more problems than learning how to be accountable.
Very good. And for anyone wanting to connect with Karen, she's clanderson.com. Obviously, podcast I found on Apple and Spotify relatively easily, books on Amazon, and also on Instagram, KCL Anderson, which she says she's not as active on. So what's your Facebook handle or name?
Everything, just KCL Anderson, you'll find me.
Very good, very good. So definitely connect with Karen, and I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you. I'm excited. It was fun. It was exciting.
Good. I appreciate it. For anyone else, head over to Take 2 Minutes and try your 15-day free trial. And if we can do anything, you have any questions, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to help. Thanks for being on the show again today, Karen. Thanks for listening. I hope you found that discussion helpful and interesting. If there are any topics you would like to hear discussed, head over to take2minutes.org and use the Contact Us form to submit your suggestions. Also, if you appreciate our content, sign up for an account at take2minutes.org. Subscriptions help us to continue generating new content. Thanks again.